Now, don't assume that a slower housing market automatically means that you're going to get a better deal, because the July numbers are showing something much more interesting. Buyers have more choices, they're being more selective. But depending on what and where you buy, your negotiating power could look very different. And when we zoom into Littleton, Lakewood, Golden, and Arvada, those differences become pretty obvious. So if you're moving to West Denver, or if you're trying to understand the Denver real estate market in July 2026, let's break down what those numbers actually mean for you as a buyer. And before we get into the numbers, one quick note: remember that I am reporting on July 2026 market activity. Housing data takes time to be collected and released, so these monthly reports always reflect the most recently completed month, not necessarily what the market is doing today. And the Denver numbers come from Smedra and RE Colorado. And this month, I also looked at some broader front range data for additional context. So let's start with the Denver housing market. There were 11,929 active listings in July, up from 11,437 in the June report. The months of supply also increased from just over 3 months to 3.44 months. And homes took about 22 days to sell, compared with 18 in the previous report. Now, meanwhile, the median sales price was just over $600,000 and was actually up 2.3% compared with July of last year. So what's the story behind these numbers? Buyers had more homes to consider and a little more time to consider them, but we're not seeing prices suddenly falling apart. And that's where this market gets very interesting. And if you've been following these updates since the beginning of the year, you've watched inventory build as we've moved towards summer. So compared with earlier this year, buyers are seeing more choices. But compared with last summer, there's another side to the story. The broader 9-county front range report shows July inventory was actually about 19% lower than July of last year. Now, that's a broader geographic area than the Denver numbers that I just gave you. So I'm not comparing those two data sets directly, but it does give us some useful perspective. Inventory can be building throughout the year while still being lower than where the broader front range was a year ago. So does more inventory automatically mean that you're going to face less competition or get a better deal? Well, not necessarily. And there's another set of numbers that really drives that point home. Now, if you might remember from last month when we talked about the differences between detached and attached homes, well, that gap is becoming even more interesting. Smedra describes July as a tale of two markets. Detached homes are generally experiencing conditions that give sellers more of an advantage, while attached homes, like condos and townhomes, are giving buyers more leverage. But this month, I wanted to look a little deeper. Is that difference actually showing up in what buyers are paying? And it is. For detached single-family homes, the July median close price was $660,000, up 1.5% from last year. Now compare that with condos and townhomes. Their July median close price was $379,000, down 2.4% from last year. Now, that's not a dramatic price collapse, and I don't want to characterize it that way, but it is a meaningful difference. Attached homes are showing more price pressure. At the same time, buyers have more leverage in that part of the market. So if you're shopping for a condo or a townhome, your buying experience could be quite different from someone looking for a detached house. Which brings me back to the question that we hear all the time. Is Denver a buyer's market or a seller's market? Right now, I don't think that's the most useful question. The better questions are, what are you buying? And where are you buying it? Because now we're going to move into West Denver, and location adds another layer to this story. So let's start with Littleton, Colorado. Their real estate market had a very active July. New listings jumped about 28% compared with last July. And you might hear that and think, this is pretty good. More homes? Less competition, except pending sales increased about 16% as well. So more homes showed up and buyers showed up with them. That's the story that I want you to remember about Littleton this month. More inventory doesn't automatically mean less competition. And if you're buying here, You need to know what's happening within the specific price range and property type that you're considering. All right, now let's move over to Lakewood because Lakewood tells almost the opposite story. New listings were down about 43% compared with last July, and homes were taking about 42 days to sell compared with 30 days last year. Yet the median price was essentially flat, and that's pretty interesting. The market is moving more slowly without prices necessarily following it down. So if you're looking at a home that's been sitting for a while, does that actually mean that there's a huge discount waiting for you? Well, not necessarily. It may certainly create an opportunity for a conversation, but the price, condition, property type, and competition still matter. All right, then there's Golden. And Golden throws another wrinkle into the story. New listings were down about 7% compared with last year, but closed sales were actually up 20%. So just think about that. Fewer new homes came onto the market while more homes sold. So if you're specifically looking in Golden, the headline that Denver has more inventory doesn't necessarily describe what you're going to experience in Golden. And finally, let's talk about Arvada. New listings were basically flat compared to last July, but pending sales increased about 13%. So again, buyers haven't disappeared. And I think that may be one of the most important messages from July. Selective does not mean inactive. Buyers are still buying. They're just paying closer attention to what they're buying, where they're buying, and whether the value makes sense to them. So where does all this leave you if you're thinking about buying a home in West Denver? The July numbers don't simply say buyers are in control, and they don't say sellers are in control. They tell a much more useful story. Your leverage depends on what you're buying, your price range, and where you're buying it. Attached buyers may be experiencing a very different market from detached buyers. And Littleton, Lakewood, Golden, and Arvada certainly aren't behaving exactly the same either. That's why I don't want you making a West Denver buying decision based solely on a headline about the overall Denver housing market. Start with Denver for context. Then I want you to zoom in because that's where the information becomes much more useful. And if you're trying to figure out where you should live in West Denver, that's exactly what I want you to watch next. I have an entire playlist called Where Should You Live in West Denver, where I take you deeper into Littleton, Lakewood, Golden, and Arvada. This way you can get a better understanding of what living in each community is actually like. I'll be sure to link that playlist right below. This way you can start exploring. And if you've already narrowed down your search, but you'd like a more drilled down look at what's happening in a particular West Denver city, or if you want to know more about the neighborhood, price range, or property type, be sure to reach out to me. I'm happy to break down the current market data for the specific areas that you're considering, because the Denver numbers give us the big picture. But when you're making a move, the local numbers are where the story really starts to matter. Until then, I want you to remember life is short, live somewhere awesome, and be well. We'll see you next time.